Hi everybody, a bit of a different perspective today. What you're used to seeing is the modelling area, which is upstairs in this two-storey barn. But today we're downstairs in the carpentry shop, and what I'm going to be doing is sorting out a baseboard for the Hood model which we've just finished. So for the baseboard, what else could I use but a piece of oak which I've managed to source. This is European oak. I couldn't get any English oak unfortunately, but oak of any nature is synonymous of course with the Royal Navy, so I wanted to do the baseboard in oak. It's a beautiful piece of wood, nice and dense, so we should get a nice finish from it. The first thing I'm going to do is plane the top side just to get a nice flat surface for it, and then I'll make it equal thickness by planing the other side on the thicknesser here. So the machinery is going to be pretty noisy, so I'll have to switch you off for the time being while we get this to the right thickness. Okay, so it's time to get the model fitted onto its permanent baseboard. It's been on this plywood for several months now, probably 6 or 7 months. And the way I'm going to have to do it is to just swing one pedestal at a time, to detach this pedestal, swing it across, leaving the front pedestal attached. Get that all fixed up at the back and then do the same process at the front, and hopefully that'll keep the model fairly stable and we won't have any incidents. So fingers crossed. After all this work over the last 10 months, I don't want to wreck it now. It's a very heavy piece of wood, the oak, so it's pretty stable on there, I hope. I'll just expose the rear pedestal. Is the bolt ready? Okay, let's lift her over. That's when you find out that you've done your measurements correctly or not. Okay, so that's the temporary baseboard done. I'm going to save that for the Bismarck build, which will be coming up next year. Just to finish the board off, I've got some self-adhesive felt pads. These are basically furniture pads. And then the finishing touch is the nameplate from the Pontos set. That's a nice addition to the Pontos set. And I'll just fix that with a little bit of self-adhesive tape, double-sided tape. So there we are, that's the baseboard finished. So there she is, all safe and sound on a permanent baseboard. And I could do with something a bit stronger than coffee, I can tell you. That was a pretty hair-raising 10 minutes. So this is a bit of a commemoration, really. This is the ship's bell, one of which was found in the wreck of the ship and was recovered and is now on display in the Portsmouth Historic Dockyard. Okay, so that's it for the Hood playlist. All finished. This is the last one. And I said last week that I'd have a think about what I'd picked up, what I'd learned over the last 10 months building the model, and some observations if you're thinking of tackling the model yourselves, particularly with the Pontos set. The first thing is, I suppose, that you've got to have the time to build a model like this. I suppose that on an average week I'll do 5 days in the shed, and when I'm in, probably 5 or 6 hours in a session. So over the last 40 weeks or so, that's probably around about 1200 hours building this particular model. I know I've been doing other bits and pieces during that time with the Vulcan, but it's probably around about 1200 hours. So you've got to be able to have the time to invest to do something like this. The other consideration is having the space to build something like this. You'll remember that in the first 2 or 3 episodes I was building the hull over in the corner at the bench where I do the detail work, and it quickly became fairly clear that I was going to have a different arrangement. The model is something like 1300 millimeters long, I think, so you've got to have the space, and I quickly set up this separate table to have the model permanently out. I wasn't putting it in storage at all. And I think you've got to really be able to do that to tackle something like this. The other thing is having the space to display it. Having spent all that time building it, it's not something that I want to tuck away in a cupboard gathering dust. So it's going to be on display above the PC where I do the video editing, so it'll be a permanent reminder of the trials and tribulations of building the model. The next thing is research. The ship had a 20 odd year career, and during that time there were various refits and modifications, so you've got to be able to fix the time period that you're wanting to model and do the research about what the ship looked like at that particular time. The Trumpeter kit is designed to reflect the 1941 fit, and you'll have seen throughout the playlist that Trumpeter haven't got it right in all cases, and neither have Pontos for that matter. There's some differences that you need to accommodate if you want to get an accurate model for 1941. There's lots of information out on the net. Obviously it's a big resource for modelers these days, but the other main source of reference was the Anatomy of the Ship book, HMS Hood. And I would say that that's pretty essential reading, really. I've been using that throughout the build and right the way up to the last week, and it's been absolutely invaluable with the drawings. Some of the detailed drawings have been really invaluable to get the model just right. The other volume that I've used quite a bit, but less so, is the Battlecruiser Hood, the biography by Bruce Taylor. And that's of value really for the photographs and the historical narrative in it, because the author describes the changes to the ship and what it was doing at various parts of its career, and there's little bits of information, little snippets of information that you can use to make sure that the model's as accurate as you can make it. So you've got to have the time as well to do that sort of research, both in the books and on the internet. The other source of information, of course, is the HMS Hood Association. I think I mentioned in the first part of this series that there was an awful lot of information on the HMS Hood website. There's quite a detailed review of the Trumpeter kit and a description of how to do the modifications to the Trumpeter kit to bring it up to 1941 standard. So alongside the volumes, the HMS Hood Association website will take you a long way in getting an accurate model of the hood. The next consideration, I suppose, is how much modelling experience you have and whether or not you're going to be able to tackle a model like this, particularly with the Pontos set and all the brass and resin that's in it. And the difficulty with the Trumpeter kit is that you've got to be able to tackle at least some etched brass, and that's because the Starfish platforms, both the main and foremast, are entirely built from etched brass parts. There's no provision for any plastic in the Trumpeter kit, so you've got to have a level of ability that can tackle the etched brass with some reasonable confidence. I set out building this model without an awful lot of soldering experience. I hadn't done any really, particularly on small model parts. And you'll remember that when I was doing the bridge, I was gluing a lot of the platforms together. but I quickly realised that soldering was really a much better option. It's much stronger and it leads to a lot fewer rebuilds. So quite a lot of the time I would glue a platform together, and as you were handling it, it would crack and open up again. Whereas once it's soldered, a piece of brass isn't going to do that really unless you handle it very roughly. So I invested about halfway through the build in a decent soldering iron, and that really helped me to have a go at soldering some of the parts, and I started to get much better results with the brass after that. And I'd still say that my skill level with the soldering iron is pretty basic. There are an awful lot of techniques that I haven't mastered yet. But building any model, and particularly a model like this, is something that's going to add to your skill level and the range of techniques that you develop. So hopefully we learn something new every time we open the box of a new model. In terms of the build sequence, I think I probably got it more or less right. There were a couple of areas where I built things too soon. But the general principle of working from the centre line of the ship and then upwards was probably the right one. And that's because it's so easy to break and knock parts off that you've fitted too early. There's one or two examples where I did that. You might have seen last week that I knocked the whaler off by accident fitting the accommodation ladders. So these little mishaps will occur if you don't get the build sequence in the right order. I think if I was to do this again, I would do the rig almost at the end. I think I did it a little bit too early, and I ended up redoing quite a bit of it over the last couple of weeks as we closed in on the finish. But apart from that, I think I got the build sequence more or less correct. So if you want to follow the build sequence that I've set out in these playlists, I don't think you'll go too far wrong, I hope. The next thing to think about is the amount of paint and sundries that you're going to need for this kit. And if you remember when I was mixing the grey for the main AP507 colour, I thought I would be alright with, I think I mixed about 7 bottles of Tamiya lacquer paint. And in the end I used 2.5 times more than that, so probably getting on for 20 bottles of the grey mix. I've got a little bit left for the next Royal Navy project, but I completely underestimated the amount of paint that a model like this takes. You might be able to get away with less than I did, because I do tend to do quite a bit of repair and touch up of the model as I go along, so that tends to waste a little bit more paint than you need to. But certainly you would probably need a minimum of twice the quantity that I mixed up in that particular episode. The last thing is that I've had an enormous amount of help and encouragement from people who have kindly left comments on the video comments list, and also the encouragement I've had from the regular group who've joined me every Friday on the Premiere chat, which I've really enjoyed. I've really appreciated, guys. Thanks for that. So all that help and encouragement has given me the motivation to get this finished, and it's really kept the pace of the build up, which has been important when I felt like flagging and going on to something else. So overall it's been a really big learning experience for me. I've learned some new skills, but most of all I hope that the 50 episodes doing the hood build has helped those of you that are building the model yourselves, and hopefully you might have picked one or two hints and tips up along the way. So that's it for the hood, but I'll be moving on next week with the Revel 144 scale Flower Class Corvette with the Pontos set. And I'll be featuring that as usual on Friday nights, so I'm not giving up on the premieres. I've got used to that routine and I enjoy the Friday night chat, so I'll be carrying on with that next week. I've also got the Vulcan to finish up, and there'll be some episodes of that coming up next week as well. So I hope you've enjoyed this series, everybody, and I hope to see you next time for the Flower Class Corvette. So bye for now.